That way you're creating only one bibliography.
Do you want this paper written as if it were, let's say, a chapter 2, or as if it were something
Good
on its
questions.
own?
The answer is flat out no.
Okay.
Underline no, exclamation point, exclamation point. The point being that a chapter 2 would be much more precisely focused. This paper hopefully will have breadth. It'll represent a sector of the social science literature that relates to the kind of thing that you're interested in. But it won't be narrowed down like a chapter 2 would be. Does that make sense? Is everybody hearing that?
Yes. No.
Very important to hear that.
I did. I wish I hear you probably.
The paper for this course is a broader piece than a chapter 2 would be. A chapter 2 for a dissertation or for a proposal would be a narrower and much more precisely focused piece. I have referred to this assignment as creating the database from which a chapter 2 could be drawn. Now, indeed, as you draw that chapter 2, the focus itself will require you to go get even more of the more precise stuff than you have in this. So it doesn't follow that you can write your dissertation on the basis of what you have in this project or this course and nothing else. But I would say that's the downside. The upside is much more positive, and that is that the odds are pretty good if you do a good job in this project, you'll have at least 80% of what you will need for a good dissertation.
How would you like it laid out in format? In separate sections?
No, I don't prefer anything along that line. If you feel more comfortable and you've deliberately created it in sectors and you want to keep it that way, I have no objection. But I don't want to even hint that I would prefer it that way. The reason that I want the paper is so that I can see how you bring this together and what you do with those sectors. And if I'm looking for sectors, I'm going to expect to find them in the paper, topically or in some kind of organization. Now you're left to your own to design an effective way of organizing that paper. And I mean quite deliberately, you're left to your own to do that. Not that it's not important, but I can't possibly spell that out, given the individual characteristics of the papers and the individual characteristics of the topics. I couldn't if I wanted to. Furthermore, I don't get wildly excited about feeding people that much of a precise stipulation for a project of this sort. I would much rather leave you to your own device. The sectoring, if any, ought to be in the paper. Does that make sense? When you're writing any kind of a research report or a dissertation or anything of that major sort, always think in terms of the way users come to it and what they'll be doing, how users will be behaving. Try to make your writing as user-friendly as you possibly can. That background noise is designed to keep your spirits calm in the face of adversity. And if more lights go out, the decibels go up. And ultimately, we end up screaming and running out of here. This is what they're trying to communicate to us anyway. Let's take a look at your textbook pre-reading you did before the course. $64 question that I'm going to start with is, what's the difference between sociology and the sociology of religion? And which better describes this textbook?
Sociology of religion is a box.
Good start, good start. It's a focused subset of the larger domain, sociology. Right. Sociology of religion what is a parallel concept to sociology of religion? You also have sociology of
Ideals.
all kinds of stuff. Stick a lot of stuff in there. Perhaps most parallel to religion would be sociology of education. In other words, institutional view of a sociological application. Sociology of occupations. Sociology of business.
Corporation.
Pardon?
I said corporation.
Yeah, sociology of a corporation.
Institutions.
Institutional notions, yeah, and personal or individual notions. Good. All right, so far, that's a good point. Sociology of religion is a subset. All right, now, if it is a subset, in what way is it bounded differently from sociology is intensively concerned with structures. Right? What do we mean by structure? In what way does religion have structures?
There's patterns in how people respond to and from within religious experiences. That crosses the religion itself. Each individual religion is ways of pattern to how we respond to religious phenomena.
Okay.
I'm thinking there's kind of two different kinds of structures. One would be just the church or the network of people. And then the other kind of structure I'm thinking of is just the system of beliefs or faith.
Which of those leads to the other? Is there a cart before the horse problem here at all?
Yeah, I think the system of belief leads the certain people to come together to form the network of people or the church.
You're arguing then that the beliefs are the prior or the generative, and the outcomes of relationship and organization are the secondary.
Well, I suppose that it would be cyclical in that.
So, in effect, it may be a bad question. It may be a question of what leads to what at a given moment in the cycle. I suspect that's probably right. But I also suspect that your original presupposition was the sound one. That is, that it's the belief structures that ultimately are the overarching framework. Is there a sociology of Christianity? Wherein does sociology of Christianity, is there a better way to understand it? Good. And I particularly appreciate your seeing the book for that contrast, because that's the reason I like this book. It's because it does make that contrast about as sharply as any sociology of religion book that I've ever went into. And you see sociology much more for its lining things up. Sociology lines things up. Sociology produces a Campolo who says, if you got a bus, I can tell you a whole bunch of other things. Anthropologist comes along and says, this is a strange way to think. What did you say your name was? Campolo? Now, why do Campolos think like this? In other words, the notion of predictive sets and extending your hypothesis way on out is much more characteristic of the way sociologists think. And that's one reason that Campolo is Campolo, because he is no anthropologist. He's a sociologist. By training and by behavior and perhaps even by ethnic background. I sometimes think all Italians are sociologists. But he lines things up, and he doesn't necessarily ask the bigger question. But the anthropologist always likes to believe that he's probing for the bigger question. Now, this is a moot point, whether or not we're really getting the bigger question or we're just getting a bunch of garbage. it does often fill the floor with something or other. But yeah, the sociologist is much more concerned about how does the bus relate to this, relate to this. Why do people have church buses? Now, this is why we can ask questions like, is there a sociology of Christianity? And it's a workable question, but it's a difficult one because Christianity is so diverse that it makes it leaves the sociologist a very poor point of entry. Now, if we ask the sociologist to, Jesus, I'll bring you in on this one, to talk about differences between the sociology of Pentecostalism and the sociology of the Roman Catholic Church in Brazil. Now the sociologist would be lining up the turkeys in the direction that he shoots. Now, try that for a minute. What is the sociology of Pentecostalism in Brazil in contrast with the sociology of Catholicism? At what points are they similar and dissimilar? Can you talk to that for a minute or two?
And I think one thing that would be very common is, for example, the way they do worship. Very similar. They are learning from every other church. For example, the charismatic Catholic would be learning very much from the Pentecostals, especially in worship, in the camping meetings, all these kind of things. They would be bringing into their own context and using it.
Good. That was very helpful. Did you notice what categories of things she talked about? I think she did a real good job of dealing with this question of how do you see the sociology of Catholicism and the sociology of Pentecostalism, and she brought in yet a third category. But notice it was a structural category based on function, right? Did you notice what she did and didn't talk about in terms of the definition, the descriptions that she gave? That basically is the sort of thing she was talking about when she differentiated. This is the kind of stuff that sociologists talk about when they differentiate. What is the characteristic of it? I'll tell you one thing it's not. It's not ideology. It's not ideology. It's not even beliefs. She got through that whole thing without really talking beliefs. Did you notice that? Well, that should have been your alert. What is she talking about? She's not talking about beliefs.
Relationships.
But not just relationships in the abstract. She's talking about ways that relationship functions. She's talking about the doing of relationship. She was talking about actions. Over and over and over again, processes and actions, processes and actions. And the differentiation here is around the lines of processes and actions. Even as she got into the old Catholic and the new. The old Catholic don't do certain things. The new Catholics do. Here, she said that. And that's a good example of what sociologists basically do. They just look at what people do. What do sociologists do when they want to create an instrument to assess degree of religiousness? And by the way, that's where you go to get those instruments. You don't go to psychologists. You go to sociologists. And they give you scales that allow you to assess the degree to which a person is religious. And what will that scale have on it in the way of items?
Like how many times they attend church,
Exactly.
or some of the active
The doing things,
indicators
the
or
action
whatever.
things. Exactly. Never mind the mind, never mind the heart, never mind the soul, never mind all the rest of that abstract stuff. What does a person do? How do you see it? By their fruits you shall know them. That was written for the sociologists. Really. And in fact, there is a term that we use in sociological research, and that's about the only place where we really use it. It's become more and more common for Christians to talk about it. Measures of, when you're studying the degree to which a person is religious,
Religiosity?
Religiosity. And it is a legitimate word. Religiosity. Literally measures of the behaviors of religiousness. Now, if you're an idol worshiper, the issue is how many idols have you got, and how often do you worship them, and in what ways and what substance do you put to your worship? You know, what are your offerings? If you're an ancestor worshiper, the issue is how much are you involved with your ancestors, and do you venerate them more than once a year? Do you have the idols in their relics in your home, and so forth? Those are measures of religiosity. Now, one of the things that disturbs a lot of us is when people see that as a route to go, and they begin measuring spiritual growth by assessing religiosity indexes. I'm not comfortable with it, but you know, it looks like some kind of way to get at it, and it is a way to get at it. It's a little bit trying to put measurement of air on a spring-loaded scales. Pick it up anyway. Don't worry about what chapter you're in.
She talks about community and how religion takes place in community, how the identity of the community, the identity of the individual, separated from the community, what the individual meanings and the corporate meanings are.
What is and
the corporate meanings of faith as is taking place in the community or the corporate religion, and as opposed to the individual religion.
So again, we're making a distinction between two species or two levels of
faith, really.
Of the faith exercises.
The behavior, right.
And we're in two different kinds of community: the individual community and a larger structure of community. By the way, the word community. What social science disciplines own that word? Community. Sociology and anthropology. Psychology is little by little discovering it, as is several others of the derivative fields of social science. But if you'd gone back to the literature 35 years ago, you'd find very little emphasis in psychology on community. And quite frankly, very little emphasis in education 35 years ago on community. Today, quite a bit. Now, I think that's an interesting thing to notice, and it helps to explain one thing that you might have reflected on already. Education is more heavily influenced by what than what within social science.
By psychology.
Pardon?
By psychology.
Rather than or more than sociology. And clearly, that's the first two. It's somewhat less influenced by anthropology, but those are ascending, and psychology is not gaining much more. For many years, psychology was a derivative field, or was the parent field, really, of the study of education. And the first educational researchers were in psychology. How far back does the study of educational psychology go? Put a date on. Educational psychology begins to emerge around the turn of the century. Educational sociology, when does that begin to emerge?
1960s.
Oh, 1940s. 1940s. Educational sociology comes along later than the educational psychology. Educational anthropology emerges in the 60s. Strange as it may seem, these are relatively recent acknowledgments. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't anthropologists talking to educational issues a lot earlier than that, nor any of the rest of this. But in terms of the standing literature and the journals, the Ed Psych journals begin to emerge in the early century, and the Ed Soc journals begin to emerge in the World War II era, and the Anthro literature begins to emerge in the 60s. This book was written at the time of a transition from the use of meaning systems to worldview, which is a fairly recent transition. Follow me? Worldview is popular on this campus, largely because of Paul Hebert's writings in worldview, which have been very good and very important. And in I think, a Christian perspective, worldview makes a lot of sense as to how to understand this. But it is nothing more or less than the warmed over, Christianized concern for the old sociologists' meaning systems. Have you learned anything this afternoon? Now, what is the point of meaning systems? What does a person mean when they use the word meaning systems?
Outlook to life.
A basis of interpretation. Embedded in the words you use right there. A basis of your basis of interpretation. Think of ideas. Get the picture? See it? Ideas. See meaningful ideas. Watch it again. Ideas. Ideas. Meaningful ideas.
So the meaningful ideas then that connect you to the social group.
Right. In fact, it's the meaningfulness of any idea that allows you to connect it to any other idea. And that's why I think the best way to do it with your hands is ideas. We're in favor of ideas. We like to hear people talk about ideas, but they're not going to do anything other than entertain until they are brought into some relationship or coherency. And we talk about coherent ideas. Now, a worldview is simply a self-conscious structure of coherent ideas, which then is, as Hebert would tell you, a way of looking at the world. You can't say worldview. One of the persons who's had a great deal of influence on religious education, who came from the field of sociology, in fact, was one of the real pioneers in educational sociology, was Robert J. Havighurst. Heard the name?
Yes.
Robert J. Havig, H-A-V-I-G, Havighurst. University of Chicago, that's right. University of Chicago. Robert J. Havighurst. One of the terms that he coined, for which he is still remembered. Many people use the term now. Does anybody happen to know it? Good! Right on the button.
Wow.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love it. I was going to give you the hint, DT. Developmental tasks. Now, what is a developmental task? Is it not what we were just now talking about in reference to this author emphasizes such things as age-related? That's what a developmental task is. A developmental task is an understanding of what people are needing to learn at various and successive stages of development. Children in this society need to know to walk on the right side of the road. At what stage does that become a developmental task? Infancy, early childhood, late childhood. Choose one. Early childhood, not infancy. There's nothing about that as a developmental task in infancy. And quite often, if we wait until too late, as in late childhood, the child is already malfunctioning in this society. Now, developmental tasks then are society specific. They are not anthropologically normed. And that's one of the reasons why developmental task logic is much more a function of sociology than it is of anthropology.
Would you consider then having this work and the social thing about the tasks kind of the parallel to Erickson's
Yes.
psychological stages?
Yep. Now, let's unpack that a little bit for everybody.
Okay, well Erickson, when he does...
Erickson.
Erik Erikson does the psychological stages of psychosocial development. He talks about the epigenetic principle, that all things unfold organically in the proper time frame. And then in going through those stages, we go through a series of crises that precipitate the growth to the next stage. While they're not age-specific in that this must happen within this 18-month time frame, they are within a parameter. Age-specific as you move from one stage building upon the next stage. The trust and mistrust of the infant stage really lays the foundation for all of the subsequent stages. You can't build a secure identity if you didn't, in the fourth stage, if you didn't get the trust in the first stage. So I would call it a sequential kind of movement through life.
Okay, what do we call Erik Erickson's stages?
Psychosocial developmental stages.
Developmental stages, and he calls them psychosocial. Now, what field is he coming out of?
Out of psychology.
Out of psychology. So why does he stick the word social in there? Psychosocial.
Because everyone goes through them, because it's not individual. It's a social process.
But they
Takes place within
That place with now you're
the
these
social
are
community or
these are
the culture.
functions that take place within a cultural setting,
But he says
social setting.
while they, I don't know if this is true, he says that while they might not be exactly the same age for each culture, that each culture does go through the same.
And one of the places where he gets in trouble is he argues that they occur in the same sequence in every culture.
Right, and with
Which is
men and
not
women,
so.
and with genders
Yeah, which is not so.
they don't
And
necessarily.
a lot of people have said that his work would have lasted a lot longer if he hadn't made too many assertions about the sociological determinism. If he'd have stuck with the psychological, then he'd been all right. Yeah. In fact, that's one of the things that we can see in Havighurst. Havighurst's work translates rather well into other cultures because he makes no assertions about cultural independence. In other words, the developmental tasks in France are not assumed to be the same as they are in Germany. So that he doesn't hook it up to a determinism. He hooks it up to the variables of culture. Therefore, Havighurst will certainly outlive his age mate, Erickson. And one of the great contributions of sociology really has been that a lot of social theory has grown out of sociology because of its relative attention to culture being substantially more than psychology's attention to culture. The field of psychology has historically thumbed its nose at concerns from anthropology and ultimately from sociology, even though some great psychologists have had to confess in their terminology that there is a psychosocial. That's the concession. Now then, which of the fields, if we're trying to get a picture of social science, we might just look at a textbook and not just look at specifics, but I want to do a bigger picture. Where is the older of the contemporary arguments then centered in psychology? The older arguments are in psychology. Because psychology has been a modern field for longer. Now, we already mentioned that anthropology's been around for a long time, beginning back with the Dutch traders. But not modern anthropology. Modern anthropology doesn't grow out of the theological anthropology, and it truly doesn't grow contiguously out of the Dutch kids. It is a kind of an emergent field in the latter part of the 19th century. By that time, psychology is already all over the bandwagon, thumping on drums. And at that point, sociology is still in the minds of a few philosophers, Thorstein Veblen being particular. Sociology emerges out of the minds of philosophers, perhaps more surely than any other field. And name some of the great philosophers of the 19th century who were really sociologists. I already gave you one hint. Veblen, V-E-B-L-E-N, Veblen, Thorstein Veblen. Name another. I was hoping somebody would. Karl Marx. Karl Marx is a philosopher who was part of the origination of sociology. When is Karl Marx? Before that.
1883.
He's dying. I mean, he's getting pretty old. And his great work was in the 60s to 80s. So this is where sociology emerges. But what is already going gung-ho by that point? The early and crude forms of modern psychology. Now, we say early and crude. By that time, the lecturers were running around the lecture circuit doing lectures on phrenology, which was one of the practical manifestations of psychology. Do you know phrenology, P-H-R-E-N? Phrenology? Don't any of you ask me if you can do your paper on phrenology. No. The answer is no. What is phrenology? Exactly. The logging of, the mapping of, and literally the measurement of the shape of heads. And what was the logic behind that? Terribly reasonable argument. Just happened to be absurd.
The size of the brain?
The presumption that the shape of the brain, the size of the brain, since everybody had finally become conscious of the fact that it's not the heart,
It's the brain.
it's the brain, and therefore differences in the brain ought to account for differences in personality, differences in intelligence, differences in, oh man. And these guys were running around the lecture circuit in the 1870s, 1880s. By the time Marx was writing his early books, these guys were already making big bucks out there doing their stuff. It is from sociology that we get the definitions of the function of institutions in society. What field of social science would you turn to here? Let's play what the question gave me to give the answer, and then you have to guess the question.
Jeopardy.
Jeopardy. Let's play Jeopardy. Yeah. So the answer is sociology. The question is, what is the field that searches for the functional meaning of the tasks being performed by the categories? The categories like institutions. See, it's a category preoccupied field. So it's the field that asks the question, what do the categories do? Institutions, what do institutions do? Now, this is not to say what different kinds of institutions are there, but what in general does an institution do in a society? It relates to your point. But hold off on the answer if you know when you do. What do institutions do? What are
Control. Control.
Control. Control, management. Keep going. You're doing that.
Perpetuation of values.
First word.
Perpetuation.
Perpetuation. Establishing standards. You're right. That is the purpose of institutions. Maintenance is one of the general words used to represent all of them. To maintain, to perpetuate, to continue, to provide foundations for it. Institutions exist to perpetuate a society. Now, a sociological mind would cause you to answer this question that I will ask flatly, plainly, and securely. Changing theological education should prove to be easy. Right or wrong? A sociological orientation and knowledge, mindset, would cause you to answer that question firmly and strongly. No. And what would be your reason? Not just because you say, well, the ones that I've known are all pretty stubborn. Sociologically, that's why they're there. First of all, it's a school. And in general, since schools are institutions, sociology looks at institutions and says, aha, one of their major reasons for being there is to perpetuate. If something is sitting there to perpetuate something and you come along and want to change something, you are the enemy. Right? Now then, in the case of theological education, it is perpetuating something on behalf of
Institution that wants to perpetuate.
Exactly. It is an institution serving an institution, which makes it doubly rigid. Especially theological education ought to be easy to change. True or false? Dead false. You see it? The point here is that goodwill isn't the issue. Wanting to do the work of God isn't the issue. Spiritual renewal isn't the issue. What is the issue? It's a sociological issue. What is it? Maintaining, perpetuating, continuing. And clearly you have to answer the question, how, at the functional level, how does the work of the gospel persist across the years and never really step backward? It doesn't always move forward very fast, but it doesn't step backward. Yeah, I think that's the great mystery of the gospel, that doesn't quite conform to the sociological categories. Let's take a break, and we'll come back, work a little bit on transitioning some of this into